Now, a special report from Carol Evan Investigates.
Unqualified doctors, inadequate tests, veterans denied benefits and access to medical care. Those are just some of the findings of a year-long investigation we call Invisible Wounds. I'm Carol Evan investigative reporter AJ Lagoe. The story starts in a farm field here in Minnesota, but as you'll see, it's sending shockwaves all the way to Washington.
Yeah, I drove over the road with a semi for about 44 years.
Butch Amersma has spent his life behind one wheel or the other.
Well, I started when I was 14. That's all I've ever done.
But in 1968, the Spring Valley, Minnesota farmer nearly lost his life in Vietnam.
Run over a landmine with a PC.
While behind the wheel of a personnel carrier.
That's it. 3 days later, I woke up in Japan.
Butch's military records detail the price his body paid for his service to country.
Muscular skull fractures and fractured mandible, because this was just like a crushed egg.
Call it farmer humor, but Butch jokes there are still pieces of his head fertilizing Vietnam.
Never went back to get them, and I don't plan on it either.
Back then, he wasn't diagnosed with what we now call a traumatic brain injury. But for years, he says he suffered unexplained chronic headaches. So in 2012, after losing private insurance, Butch applied for benefits and treatment at the Minneapolis VA.
Pretty good one here.
Despite his record showing a severe head wound, a loss of part of his skull, he received no benefits for a traumatic brain injury, commonly referred to as a TBI. His VA examiner wrote in his records, there is no diagnosis of TBI/concussion.
I got it coming, I want it. If I ain't got it coming, I don't want it.
But our investigation turned up evidence that Butch didn't get a fair shot at benefits. That's because he was examined by someone who, according to the VA's own policies, was not qualified. In the years since Vietnam, we've learned much more about the often invisible but debilitating impact of brain injuries. So the VA adopted a rule about who can diagnose them. It's spelled out right in the VA's training manual, complete with the word important with an exclamation point added for emphasis. It's also written on every single TBI exam document a VA doctor fills out. Only 4 types of specialists, including neurologists and neurosurgeons, are allowed to diagnose if a veteran has a TBI. So what type of specialist did Butch's initial TBI exam?
There was a nurse practitioner I had in the cop thing.
That's right. Records show Butch's TBI exam was done by a Brenda Roche. She's a nurse practitioner, not a neurologist.
You take and go to your appointments, what they tell you to do, and you take it for granted they know what they're doing.
And we discovered Butch is not an isolated example. In fact, there's evidence that he's part of a disturbing pattern. Attorney Ben Krause represents a Minnesota veteran examined by not just one, but 2 unqualified doctors.
That there's no excuse. The VA has absolutely no excuse.
That veteran's records detail a concussion received in 1958 on the USS Yorktown when this heavy metal hatch smashed into his head and knocked him out. Years later, when the vet developed a brain tumor, VA neurologist Khalif Bouchara concluded the tumor, at least as likely as not, was caused by the traumatic brain injury. But when that vet went down the VA hallway to apply for benefits through Comp and Pen, he was given a TBI exam by Dr. Danny Smith, an osteopath, not an approved specialist. He concluded the veteran didn't even have a TBI.
They concluded he did not have traumatic brain injury when in fact he did, and it was clearly in the record.
So Krause filed an appeal. Official records show the VA agree that Dr. Smith was not qualified to have done the TBI examination. So they ordered another one, this time by Dr. Ephraim Gabriel. He also ruled no current clinical diagnosis of TBI. But get this, Dr. Gabriel is also not one of the 4 specialists who can diagnose TBIs.
And they had him conduct the exam anyway and drag my client through the dirt.
So a veteran was denied benefits after exams by 2 different doctors who were not qualified TBI specialists, overriding the finding of the VA's own highly trained neurologist. Dr. Bouchara, who then authored this scathing memo about the errors made and wrote that Dr. Smith and Gabriel failed to consult with an expert in the field that could have provided a competent medical opinion.
Dr. Smith and Dr. Gabriel should never have conducted the initial TBI exam for my clients.
So Kraus filed yet another appeal, and the Minneapolis VA finally had a truly qualified comp and pen doctor examine the veteran who agreed he had a TBI. Now he gets more than $1,400 a month in VA benefits.
Had he just gone away, he would have been shy $1,000 a month for the rest of his life.
We wanted to know just how many initial TBI exams were done by the same two unqualified doctors. In response to our FOIA requests, the VA admitted that since 2010, they've done 127. In all, records show that out of the 21 medical professionals who performed initial TBI exams at the Minneapolis VA since 2010, only one of them was a TBI specialist. VA officials refused to answer our questions about unqualified doctors on camera. But just one day after we aired Butch's story, the VA issued this statement admitting it did conduct some initial TBI evaluations with providers who were not specialists. How many improper exams were there? The VA refused to say.
That's government. Don't want to get me started on government.
Coming up, our search for answers is just beginning, and it's prompting a national investigation.
If it happened in Minneapolis, it's possible, and I would argue probable, it happened elsewhere.
Log online to the Department of Veterans Affairs website, and you can find the name and certification of every VA doctor at every VA hospital anywhere in America. In spite of that, the VA has a secret it wants to keep. Denied. That's what they repeatedly wrote us when under FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, we asked for names of employees performing initial traumatic brain injury, known as TBI exams, in compensation and pension departments at VA hospitals around the country. You may be asking, why do we want that information?
I still got wires up here and in my jaw yet. And they'll never come out.
It's because of veterans like Butch Hammersma. The Minnesota farmer left part of his skull behind in Vietnam when he drove over a landmine.
First time I looked in the mirror, I thought I was done, got killed.
When we discovered that veterans like Butch had been examined by unqualified VA doctors,
It was a nurse practitioner I had.
we wondered, how many more cases are there? At first, the Minneapolis VA tried to minimize the problem with a statement saying a small number of initial TBI exams were not performed by the required specialists. But we wanted to know, is it just a small number of TBI exams being done by unqualified doctors like the VA claims, or is it more extensive, both here at the Minneapolis VA and at VA facilities around the country? But trying to get those answers for veterans like Butch is where we ran into a locked gate. Remember those denial FOIA letters when we and reporters at our sister stations across the country began asking for the names of doctors who've performed initial TBI exams? The Department of Veterans Affairs suddenly started claiming that's private information that won't contribute significantly to the public's understanding of the activities of the federal government. We're appealing that decision, but Congress is already asking questions. Representative Tim Walz says he's been told more than 300 Minnesota veterans were affected, and there could be others nationwide.
If it happened in Minneapolis, it's possible, and I would argue probable, it happened elsewhere.
But the VA's denials didn't stop us from digging deeper into the qualifications of VA doctors. For months, Carol Evans has been investigating cases of misleading information about VA doctors posted on the VA's own website. Claims of board certifications that the doctors don't really have. Example, Dr. Ephraim Gabriel. The Minneapolis VA claims in black and white he's board certified in public health and general preventative medicine. But when we fact-checked that, we found there's no record of him ever holding any board certification.
Board certification is very much about the public trust.
Dr. Lois Margaret Nora is president of the ABMS, American Board of Medical Specialties. The group, the VA says, certifies its doctors.
That tells people something very important about their physician's training, about how their physician has been assessed and what that physician does every day as part of his or her practice.
At the Tomah, Wisconsin VA, we discovered the doctor who treated Candace Dellis's father right before his death was not board certified in emergency medicine like the VA claimed.
And they're lying to the veterans that are coming into the medical centers for care.
Our sister stations found the same problem. In Buffalo, New York, they sampled 133 doctors and found 26 that did not have the certifications the VA there claimed. It was a similar story in Denver. Doctors who'd never earned board certification and others who were long expired.
The investigation.
Our findings have congressmen demanding an official investigation.
We have great concern, and we're grateful for the Care 11 investigation.
Still to come.
Car bomb.
The Army said this blast caused a permanent brain injury. So why doesn't the VA agree? This story begins in the war zone that was Kirkuk, Iraq in 2006. See that car driving down the road? Let's apply the brakes for just a moment. What you can't see in this video is the car is about to cross paths with a patrol led by a tough young scout platoon leader named Captain Charles Gatlin. Okay, back to the car that is about to change Gatlin's life
car bomb.
Forever.
And detonated. And when it blew over the wall, we were in the debris field. And I went down. Noticed something hit back of my head. I was subsequently diagnosed with a moderate TBI.
TBI, that's traumatic brain injury.
Than what it used to be.
It would lead to the end of Captain Gatlin's military career.
I had to leave the Army.
In the years following the explosion that gave Gatlin his brain injury, the Army did 3 full batteries of neuropsychological workups.
And those things, they're terrible, but probably 8 hours apiece.
They found a number of problems, including persistent frontal lobe dysfunction. The final exam in 2009 concluded that since it was already 3 years post-injury, Gatlin's deficits are likely to be stable and permanent. So the Army permanently retired him with a 70% TBI disability. And the Gatlins moved to Montana.
And that's where the problem started.
To qualify for VA benefits, he was told to report for a re-evaluation at the Fort Harrison, Montana VA. Records show a VA psychologist named Robert Bettine ignored the Army's more thorough test and used a brief screening tool called an R-Bands, originally designed for dementia patients. Based on that short R-Bands test, Dr. Bettine found if Mr. Gatlin had a cognitive impairment in the past, it's likely that this has resolved.
I saw this man 20 minutes. 20 minutes, and then a decision was made.
After that brief exam, the VA dropped his TBI disability rating dramatically from 70% to just 10.
I mean, this is ridiculous.
The Gatlins appealed, but they got nowhere with the VA.
And they didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to hear it at all.
But surrender is apparently not in the Gatlins' DNA. They came at the VA with a new strategy, filing this complaint with the State Board of Psychologists. After reviewing the case, the board, at the time headed by Dr. George Watson and Dr. Stuart Hall, agreed with the Gatlins.
We felt that in this case, the person had been shortchanged.
Our board thought that the process used by Dr. Bettine was deficient.
So deficient that the state board sanctioned the VA psychologist, ruling he violated accepted standards of practice when he based his diagnosis on the R-Bands. The state board wrote, the R-Bands is not an appropriate tool for determining the effects of mild TBI.
It was not sensitive enough to do what the VA purported that it was supposed to do. And so we reprimanded the psychologist.
The doctor in his defense stated he was just following VA policy, that the R-Bands evaluation he conducted is the same one that's conducted at VA centers throughout the United States.
You think there's other veterans out there who may not have gotten a fair benefits rating because of the screening and the exam that was performed?
The way that process is set up, I think that that's a very likely reality.
When we reported that unqualified doctors were performing TBI exams here at the Minneapolis VA, it raised questions about hundreds of specific cases here. But this ruling out of Montana now raises very serious questions about one of the tests the VA is using nationwide. The medical board found that the R-Band's training manual itself indicates mild impairments cannot be detected.
That process is not going to pick them up, and so they're going to be labeled as not having cognitive difficulties.
When in fact they very well might.
When they very well might.
But the VA refused to abide by the Montana ruling, writing to the psychology board, state rules don't apply to federal facilities.
The VA said that what Dr. Bettine did was consistent with VA protocol. What does that statement tell you?
Well, it tells me that the VA protocol is not appropriate for all patients that are coming through for C&P evaluations with TBI issues.
If he's right, it means that life-altering deficits from brain injuries suffered by veterans surviving explosions like this can be easily missed and TBI benefits denied.
I mean, this is, yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem.
When we continue, what's being done to fix it? Welcome back. We've been telling you about problems we've uncovered, and we're pleased to report in the wake of our investigation, there's action. Here's the story of a Minnesota veteran finally getting the help he needs after years of painful delay. Plainview, Minnesota, a town so welcoming, even the corn waves. For Anton Welke, it's home.
Everybody always makes a comment about our steer. Oh, you're from Plainview? You got the steer?
Maybe it's the flagline streets, but Plainview seems to be the small American town where service to country,
Grandpa, Laverne, he was in World War II.
Is in the blood.
This one's my dad. He was in the Army. He was in Vietnam. And right here's mine.
Anton served on the flight deck aboard the USS John C. Stennis.
I think it's everyone's duty. They should do it. That's why I did it.
But that service very nearly cost him.
I'm like, we're not going to make it. This is not working.
Not just his marriage to wife Christina, but almost everything.
Almost made me take my own life. Go.
Just what could spark a man who appears to have so much to live for, to contemplate,
it's right in here somewhere,
ending it all? The answer lies buried in the pages of his military records.
I've never read any of these.
On a night when battle station alarms were sounded on board the Stennis.
There it is. April 6, 2002. Running up ladder well, hit head on bulkhead.
Bam. I was sitting on the ground and grabbed my hand and there was blood all over it. And I was just kind of like, whoa.
A heavy metal hatch.
There was some vomiting.
Slammed down on his head.
Just took me down to medical and got me stitched up and went right back to work.
The blow to the head was soon forgotten, but it wasn't long. A few months before the young sailor started exhibiting unexplained issues.
Sleeping was one of my main issues. I would fly off the handle. Bad anger issues.
I started realizing that the guy that I married I wasn't really sure who was going to wake up every morning.
After leaving the Navy, Anton and Christina returned home to Plainview and started a family. But the once happy-go-lucky Anton seemed to be battling
Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, you know.
An ever-growing list of internal demons.
I just get mad at my wife, or I get mad, I lose feeling in my arms, and just I'm so drained, I can't stay awake.
He has a sleeping disorder. He has a mood disorder. He has panic disorder. He has been diagnosed with PTSD.
In 2012, believing Anton's issues might be related to his military service, his private doctors at Mayo recommended he go to the VA for help.
I truly thought I was going for help.
The VA sent him to their compensation and pension unit.
And he's trying to tell them, I need help. Not I need money, I need help. Help me.
Because of the old blow to the head detailed in his service records, Anton received a traumatic brain injury or TBI exam. Records show Dr. Wanda Blaylark did no neuropsychological testing and found no diagnosis of TBI. Anton went home with no TBI treatment and no answers.
It is. It's a big thing to sit and wonder in your head. Am I nuts?
The veteran found himself at his church.
I had nothing left in me. And
spending hours on his knees,
prayed to the Lord,
contemplating taking his life.
I didn't care no more. I was physically and mentally tired.
Looking up and in, Anton found strength through faith and family.
I knew I still had something to live for.
In our most intimate moments have looked at me in the eyes and said, I'm trying. Like, I don't want to lose you guys.
But there was still the question, why did he have these problems? 3 years would pass before the Welkes got an answer. It came after Carol Levin began investigating how the VA had been using unqualified doctors to conduct TBI exams. As we began pushing the VA for answers, Anton and more than 300 Minnesota veterans were notified the doctors who did their original TBI tests were not qualified, so they'd be getting new exams with proper specialists.
He actually did tests with me. I wasn't a number finally. I was actually getting care.
Well, he said to you before you even left, without a doubt, you have a traumatic brain injury, and thank you for your service.
That finding by a qualified TBI specialist threw open the doors that the VA previously closed. Anton's now receiving treatment and cognitive therapy in the Minneapolis VA's top-notch polytrauma center. But he's left to wonder why the VA used a doctor not qualified to diagnose his injuries and denied him the help he needed for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
One veteran finally getting the help he deserves. One of many, we hope, getting better care. Congress is taking action too, demanding a nationwide review that's currently underway of how the VA handles traumatic brain injury exams. We'll let you know what they find. I'm AJ Lagoe. On behalf of all of us here at KARE 11 News, thanks for joining us.